If you're scrolling through your feed, looking for something real, something that matters, stop right here. I'm 87 years old. I was born in 1938, which means I lived through the 1940s as a child, and I remember everything. Not the sanitized version you see in movies or read in history books, but the real 1940s, the smells, the sounds, the fears, the hopes, the way it felt to be alive during the most pivotal decade in American history. I'm going to tell you about a world where sugar was rationed, where every family had a son or brother or father overseas, where women built bombers and children collected scrap metal, where we won the biggest war in human history and came home to build the greatest nation on earth. My name is William Henderson, but everyone called me Billy back then, and this is my story. This is our story. This is the 1940s. Let me take you back to a morning in 1942. I'm 4 years old, standing in our kitchen in Cleveland, Ohio, watching my mother prepare breakfast. But this isn't just any breakfast. This is breakfast during wartime rationing. Mom's at the stove, and she's making what she calls victory eggs, scrambled eggs stretched with milk, because we only get 2 eggs per person per week. She is frying them in bacon grease, saved in a can on the back of the stove, because butter is rationed too, just 4 ounces per person per week. The bacon itself? We got 4 ounces last week, and it's long gone. On the table is toast made from bread. She baked herself because store-bought bread uses up sugar ration stamps we need for other things. There is no jam because sugar is precious, just 1 pound per person every 2 weeks. And Mom saves it for special occasions or to get fruit in the summer. This is normal. This is what patriotism looks like. This is what every family in America is doing. Sacrificing small comforts so our boys overseas have what they need to win the war. My father is at the Ford plant, where they've converted from making cars to making B-24 bombers. He left for work at 5 this morning and won't be home until 6 tonight, working 10-hour shifts 6 days a week. My mother works too, 3 days a week at the munitions factory. And on those days, I go to Mrs. McCarthy next door, who watches 5 or 6 kids while their mothers are at the plants. This is the 1940s, where everyone contributes, everyone sacrifices, everyone does their part. The radio is on. It's always on. The big Philco in the living room is our connection to the world, and in 1942, the world is at war. We listen to Edward R. Murrow reporting from London, his voice crackling through the static, describing the Blitz, the bombs falling on Britain. We listen to President Roosevelt's fireside chats, his reassuring voice telling us we'll win this war. It'll just take time and sacrifice and unity. We listen to war news constantly, which battles we're winning, which we're losing, how many ships were sunk, how many planes shot down. Every family in America is glued to their radio because every family has someone in the fight. My Uncle James, Mom's younger brother, just 20 years old, is somewhere in the Pacific. We don't know exactly where because his letters are censored, black marks covering anything that might reveal his location. The letters arrive weeks after he writes them, and we read them over and over, looking for clues about where he is, how he's doing, if he's safe. Mom keeps every letter in a box, tied with ribbon, and sometimes I catch her reading them alone in the kitchen, tears running down her face that she quickly wipes away when she hears me coming. Uncle James left in January 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, enlisted the day after his 20th birthday. We haven't seen him since. The neighborhood is different now. Mrs. Patterson's son Robert was killed at Guadalcanal in August. She keeps his picture in the front window with a gold star, and everyone knows what that means. Gold Star Mother. Her son isn't coming home. 3 houses down, the Kowalskis have 2 sons overseas, one in Europe, one in the Pacific, and Mrs. Kowalski goes to church every single morning to pray for their safe return. Their window has 2 blue stars, meaning 2 family members in service. Our window has one blue star for Uncle James. Every window on the block has stars. Blue for serving, gold for fallen. That's what patriotism looks like. That's what the 1940s look like. On Saturdays, I go with Mom to shop, and shopping is an elaborate ritual involving ration books, stamps, points, and careful planning. Everyone gets a ration book with stamps for different categories. Red stamps for meat and cheese, blue stamps for canned goods, green stamps for sugar and coffee. You need both money and stamps to buy anything. Mom studies the newspaper ads, planning what to buy when, trying to stretch our rations as far as possible. At the butcher, she might trade sugar stamps with Mrs. Chun in exchange for meat stamps because the Chuns don't eat as much meat but use more sugar. This informal bartering system exists everywhere. Neighbors helping neighbors, sharing and trading to make sure everyone gets what they need. The grocery store has posters everywhere. Food fights for freedom. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Is your trip necessary? That last one is about gasoline rationing. 3 gallons per week for most people, less if you don't need your car for work. Dad bikes to the plant most days to save gas. When we do drive, it's for essential trips only. Carefully planned to accomplish multiple errands. Tires are nearly impossible to get because rubber is needed for the war effort. So everyone drives slowly, carefully, trying to make their tires last as long as possible. At home, we save everything. Bacon grease goes in a can to be used for cooking, or eventually taken to a collection point where S used to make glycerin for explosives. Tin cans are washed, labels removed, both ends cut out, flattened, and saved for scrap metal drives. We save aluminum foil, roll it into balls, take it to school for collection. We save newspapers, tie them in bundles, take them to collection points. Paper, metal, rubber, rags, everything can be reused. Recycled, repurposed for the war effort. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is thrown away. Don't you know there's a war on? Is what people say when someone complains or wastes something. School is different too. We start every day with the Pledge of Allegiance, hand over heart, and everyone means it. No one sits out, no one protests, no one questions. We are Americans, we are at war, and we are going to win. Our teachers, most of them women now, because the male teachers are in service, lead us in war bond sales. Kids bring dimes and quarters from home to buy defense stamps that go in a book. And when you fill the book, you can buy a war bond. My class raised enough money to buy a Jeep. We got a certificate and a picture of our Jeep, and we all felt like we'd contributed to the war effort. We have air raid drills at school. A siren sounds, and we all file into the hallway, crouch against the walls, put our hands over our heads. We're in Cleveland, thousands of miles from any enemy, but we practice anyway, because you never know. At home, we have blackout curtains. When the air raid siren sounds at night, Dad rushes around making sure every window is covered, every light blocked before the warden comes around checking. It never feels silly or paranoid. The war is real, the danger is real, and we all do our part. After school, kids play war games. We divide into Americans and Japs or Americans and Nazis. No one uses the politically correct terms we use today. This is war, and the enemy is the enemy. We have toy guns, sticks shaped like rifles, cardboard boxes made into tanks. We storm imaginary beaches, liberate imaginary villages, shoot down imaginary planes. It's all we talk about, all we think about. War is everywhere, in everything. Our comic books feature Captain America punching Hitler, Superman fighting saboteurs. Our movies show heroic soldiers and noble sacrifices. Our radio programs feature war adventures. Even our music is about the war. Boogie Woogie Boogle Boy, don't sit under the apple tree. I'll be seeing you. Let me tell you about entertainment in the 1940s, because even during war, People needed escape, needed joy, needed to forget for a little while. Movies were huge. The local theater, the Palace on Superior Street, changed programs twice a week, and Mom would take me on Saturday afternoons when she wasn't working. For 15 cents, you'd get a cartoon, a newsreel, a short film, and a feature. The newsreel was always about the war, footage from the front lines, reports on battles, propaganda pieces showing how we were winning. The features were often escapist, musicals with Judy Garland or Gene Kelly, comedies with Abbott and Costello, westerns with Roy Rogers. The theater was packed, every seat filled, everyone desperate for 2 hours away from the worry and fear of wartime. But even the movies reflected the war. Romantic dramas about soldiers leaving sweethearts behind. War films showing heroic battles. Homefront stories about women in factories. Casablanca came out in 1942, and I was too young to see it then. But years later, I understood why it resonated so deeply. Everyone in America was making sacrifices. Everyone had someone they loved in danger. Everyone understood that some things were more important than personal happiness. L'll always have Paris meant something when you didn't know if you'd ever see your loved one again. Radio was even more important than movies because it was there every day, every night, in your own home. Families gathered around the radio, the way families would later gather around televisions. Sunday nights, we listened to the Jack Benny program. Wednesday nights, Fibber McGee and Molly. We'd sit in the living room, lights dim, radio glowing, and listen to these voices, creating worlds in our imagination. Kids had their own programs. The Lone Ranger, The Shadow, Superman, broadcast after school. I'd rush home, turn on the radio, and lose myself in adventure stories while Mom prepared dinner. Music on the radio was big band. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman. This was the swing era, and even during wartime, people danced. The USO held dances for servicemen on leave or in training, and women would go to dance to boost morale, to give these young men heading overseas a good memory to hold on to. My mother had danced with soldiers at USO clubs before she married Dad. She'd tell me about it sometimes, how young they were, how scared, how they tried to hide it behind jokes and bravado. Some of those boys she danced with never came home. Fashion was dictated by wartime restrictions. Women wore practical clothes because fabric was rationed, about 3 yards per outfit. Skirts got shorter, not because of style, but because of fabric conservation. Pants became acceptable for women, especially working women, because they were practical in factories. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter in her denim shirt and red bandana, that wasn't just propaganda. That's what women really wore. My mother had 3 work outfits that she rotated through, washing them by hand at night, hanging them to dry, ironing them before dawn. Stockings were nearly impossible to get because nylon was needed for parachutes. Women would draw lines up the back of their bare legs with eyebrow pencil to make it look like they were wearing stockings. Or they'd save their precious few pairs for special occasions, wearing them carefully, mending every run and snag. Makeup was limited, lipstick was available, but everything else was scarce. Women learned to be resourceful, using beet juice for rouge, petroleum jelly for lip gloss. Men's fashion was simpler because most men of fighting age were in uniform, and civilians dressed in practical work clothes. Suits had narrow lapels and short jackets to save fabric. Pants had no cuffs. Suspenders replaced belts because metal was needed for the war. These weren't style choices. They were regulations mandated to conserve materials. The war ended in 1945, and I was 7 years old. I remember V-Day, victory in Europe, in May. The sirens started blaring in the middle of the day, and at first, everyone panicked, thinking it was an air raid. But then word spread. Germany had surrendered. People poured into the streets, crying, hugging strangers, dancing, celebrating. Mom stood in the street crying and laughing at the same time. But the celebration was muted because we were still fighting Japan, and Uncle James was still somewhere in the Pacific. Then VJ Day in August, victory over Japan. The atomic bombs had been dropped, Japan surrendered, and suddenly, impossibly, the war was over. The celebration that day was indescribable. The entire city went insane with joy. People were kissing strangers in the street. You've seen that famous photograph, the sailor kissing the nurse in Times Square. That was everywhere, in every city. Everyone overcome with relief and joy and disbelief that we'd survived, that we'd won, that our boys were coming home. Uncle James came home in November 1945. We went to the train station to meet him, and I remember standing on the platform, watching soldiers pour off the train, hundreds of them in uniform, carrying duffel bags, looking exhausted and older than their years. And then Mom screamed, "Jimmy!" and ran forward, and there he was, thinner, darker from the Pacific sun, with eyes that had seen things we couldn't imagine. She grabbed him and sobbed into his chest, and he held her and cried too. And Dad shook his hand and hugged him, and I stood there, 7 years old, understanding that something important had happened, but not quite grasping what. Uncle James moved into our spare room, and for months he barely spoke. He'd sit in the living room smoking cigarettes. He hadn't smoked before the war, staring at nothing, jumping at loud noises. Now we'd call it PTSD, but then it was just the war caught up with him, or he saw too much. Mom would try to talk to him, but he'd just shake his head. Slowly, over months and years, he came back to himself, or at least to a version of himself. He got a job at the plant, married a girl he'd known before the war, had kids. But he never talked about what happened over there. Not really. None of them did. The late 1940s were about rebuilding, moving forward, trying to return to normal, while knowing that normal had changed forever. Soldiers came home to the GI Bill let veterans go to college, buy homes, start businesses. Suburbs started expanding as returning soldiers married their sweethearts and started families. The baby boom began. So many weddings, so many babies, so much hope for the future after years of death and uncertainty. Technology exploded. Things developed for the war. Radar, television was emerging. We got our first TV in 1948, a tiny black and white set with a 7-inch screen that cost more than a month of Dad's salary. The few hours of programming each day were Cars started rolling off production lines again. Real civilian cars, not jeeps and trucks. Chrome and fins and bright colors after years of olive drab and battleship gray. Highways expanded. Drive-in theaters opened. Fast food restaurants appeared. Shopping centers replaced downtown shopping districts. America was transforming, growing, optimizing, becoming the superpower that would dominate the second half of the century. But the 1940s had scars that never healed. Every town had a memorial to the fallen, hundreds of names of local boys who never came home. Families had empty chairs at the table. Women who'd worked in factories were expected to return to domestic life, and many resented it after tasting independence and purpose. Black soldiers came home from fighting for freedom abroad to face segregation at home, planting seeds of the civil rights movement. Japanese Americans released from internment camps tried to rebuild lives destroyed by their own government. The atomic bomb hung over everything. We won the war with a weapon that could destroy civilization, and that knowledge changed us forever. Growing up in the 1940s shaped who I became in ways I'm still discovering. We learned sacrifice, real sacrifice, not the kind where you give up a latte to save money, but the kind where you eat less so soldiers can eat more. We learned community, everyone pulling together because we had to, because survival depended on it. We learned resilience. You don't have a choice when bonds are falling and sons are dying. You keep going, because what else can you do? We learned patriotism, Not flag-waving jingoism, but genuine love of country. Genuine belief that America stood for something worth fighting for, worth dying for. The 1940s taught us that freedom isn't free, that democracy must be defended, that evil exists and good people must oppose it. These weren't abstract concepts. They were daily reality. Every ration stamp, every scrap metal drive, every war bond, every letter from the front lines reinforced these truths. We were living history, though we didn't know it at the time. We were just living our lives, doing what needed to be done. When I compare the 1940s to today, I see both progress and loss. We have so much more now. Technology, comfort, convenience, prosperity beyond anything we imagined then. But we've lost something too. Community feels weaker. Shared sacrifice is rare. Common purpose is hard to find. We're divided in ways we weren't then. Or maybe we were just as divided, but a common threat united us temporarily. I don't have answers, and I'm not saying the 1940s were better. They weren't, in many ways. But they were formative, defining, a crucible that forged a generation. The values learned in the 1940s, sacrifice, duty, community, resilience, carried that generation through the rest of their lives. They built America's post-war prosperity. They raised families with discipline and expectation. They saved their money, worked their jobs, kept their promises, honored their commitments. They weren't perfect. No generation is. But they knew what they fought for, what they survived, what they built from the ashes of war. Now, at 87, I'm one of the last who remembers the 1940s as a lived experience. Most of my generation is gone. Soon all of us will be. These memories, these stories, these lessons learned through hardship and sacrifice, they'll disappear unless we share them, unless we make sure younger generations understand what we went through and why it mattered. That's why I'm here, talking to a camera, trying to bridge the gap between then and now. Because the 1940s weren't just history. They were human experience. They were children collecting scrap metal and families rationing sugar and mothers working in factories and soldiers dying on foreign beaches. They were real people living through extraordinary times, doing extraordinary things because ordinary people had no choice but to become extraordinary. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. Appreciate what you have. The peace, the prosperity, the freedom to pursue happiness without fear of bombs or invasion or totalitarian oppression that was bought with blood and sacrifice. It was earned by millions of Americans who gave up comforts, gave up years of their lives, gave up their futures so you could have yours. Don't take it for granted. Don't forget what it cost. And remember that you're capable of more than you think. The generation that grew up in the Depression and fought World War II, they didn't think of themselves as special. They were just ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. But they rose to meet them. They did what needed to be done. They sacrificed, they persevered, they triumphed. And if history calls on your generation to do the same, and it might, you never know, I believe you'll rise to meet that challenge too, because that's what Americans do. That's what the 1940s taught us. Thank you for taking this journey with me back to this 1940s. Thank you for listening to an old man's memories of a time that shaped everything that came after. If these stories moved you, if they taught you something, if they made you think about sacrifice and duty and what it means to be an American, I'd be honored if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. I have more stories to tell, more history to share, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. Until next time, remember where you came from, honor those who came before, and live in a way that makes their sacrifices meaningful. God bless you all, and God bless America.